Welcome back to Lorcana Academy.
Today's the last episode of our Starter Deck Showdown series. We played all the starter decks released by Disney against each other so that you don't have to, so that you know which deck is the best one for your money and to upgrade later on.
Once you've picked one out for yourself or just decide to get all three, you can head to Coolstuffinc.com to pick those up or any singles that you want. Make sure to use our code ACADEMY at checkout for 5% off your order.
All right, the first deck that we're going to talk about is the Ruby Emerald starter deck, and this deck is trying to be the best challenger deck that it possibly can be. It wants to make combat as difficult as possible for your opponent, with cards that have the keyword ability Evasive, which means they can't be challenged by your opponent's characters at all. Pongo, for instance, can be a very difficult card for your opponent to get off the board, and it quests for 2 every turn.
Yeah, and the only other characters that you have, they don't want to challenge anyway. You have stuff like Mad Hatter, where anytime that they hit it, you're drawing a card.
Yeah, and even if they can somehow deal with those creatures or characters, you have Aladdin to slam the door shut at the end of the day. If he gets down into play and starts challenging his opponent's creatures, he drains them for 2 lore every single combat, and you can even untap him and do it twice sometimes.
The Steel and Sapphire starter deck has a totally different game plan. It wants to skip the early turns of the game by dumping ink into your inkwell with cards like One Jump Ahead and Mickey Mouse Detective.
Yeah, and once you get to a much higher ink total than your opponent, you can be the first one to play big things. And this deck has the biggest thing of all the starter decks. It has the 8 ink Maui. It is an 8/8 for 8 that quests for 3 every single turn. Imagine getting that out on turn 4 or 5.
Oh, and even if there's something that you're worried about that your opponent played earlier, you've got cards like Beast that banish your opponent's stuff.
And last but not least, we're talking about the powerful Amber and Amethyst deck. This deck is all about singing songs early and often for advantage. It has cards like Cinderella that have the singer ability that mean they punch above their weight when it comes to singing songs, like Friends on the Other Side that draw you more cards.
And while you're doing that, you're keeping all of your characters on the board using effects like Part of Your World and Moana to make sure that they're all safe and healed up.
And you're not keeping those characters around on the board just for their own sake. Eventually, you're going to play the 7 ink 𝚱𝙴𝙳𝙺𝙼𝙺. And at that point, they can challenge your opponent to their heart's content, because if they get banished, they just go back to your own hand and you play them again the next turn.
We did play each of these decks against each other, and you can check out those full gameplay videos in the link in the description, but we'll give you a quick rundown right now so that we can tell you which deck we think was the best.
Let's start with the Amber and Amethyst versus Emerald Ruby decks. Veggie, you were playing that against NerdGirl earlier on the channel. How did the matchup feel to you?
Well, as the Amber and Amethyst player, in game 1 especially, it felt like it was really hard to keep up. There were 2 Pongos that hit the board pretty quickly, and since I can't interact with them, I had no way to catch up and win.
Yeah, 2 Pongos does feel like the best NerdGirl's deck can possibly do. What about games 2 and 3 where she didn't have that?
That went much better. I drew so many cards. All-Star for sure was the song Friends on the Other Side, which I played multiple times, so that by the time each of us had played towards the end of the game, I was the only one with gas left in the tank.
Yeah, so do you feel like games 2 and 3 were more representative, or game 1? Which deck do you think is favored?
I think the Amber and Amethyst deck has a big advantage here, because outside of those early Pongos getting on the board, I don't see a way that Emerald and Ruby can deal with it once we get to the end.
Yeah, it feels like it's not fast enough, and Amber Amethyst just takes over the game.
In the second matchup, the Emerald Ruby deck got a chance to redeem itself against the Steel and Sapphire deck. Now, that was NerdGirl playing Emerald and Ruby and you playing Steel and Sapphire Airball. It only went 2 games. How did game 1 go?
Game 1 felt pretty even. We were trading back and forth, ended up with no cards in either player's hand for a little bit, and so it came down to who could draw the best card off the top of their deck, and luckily the Steel and Sapphire deck just had really big things to draw to take over from there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Big stuff better than little stuff. So in the second game, was it the same story?
No, the second game was much less close than the first one. I ended up drawing a lot of the cards in my deck that deal direct damage to characters, and that's one thing that the Emerald Ruby deck does not seem equipped to deal with. Pongo does well against characters, but doesn't do super well against the card Smash, and there's a lot of cards with only 2 willpower, so board wipes like Grab Your Sword kind of make it a cakewalk.
All right, so at this point, at least we can say for sure that the Emerald Ruby deck is probably the worst of the 3 since it has a bad matchup against the other 2.
All right, it's time to finally crown a champion. We had a matchup with both decks that won a match playing against each other. Veggie, you were playing the Amber and Amethyst deck again against everyone's favorite Disney princess, 𝚉𝙴𝙲𝙺, on the Steel and Sapphire deck. That also only went 2 rounds. How did round 1 go?
Surprisingly, my deck went very fast. I got a lot of the smaller characters, played them early, and was able to fend off 𝚉𝙴𝙲𝙺's Steel and Sapphire characters long enough to quickly quest to 20.
Yeah, that's cool. You were able to get there before she was able to set up, I guess.
Yeah, and I did not expect that the Amber and Amethyst deck would be able to do that.
Okay, and what about round 2? More of the same?
Totally different. Yeah, my deck took more of the expected game plan of draw a bunch of cards and make it towards the end of the game, which might have been really scary since Steel and Sapphire has a bunch of really big characters, but 𝚉𝙴𝙲 didn't find any of them, so it was easy for me to then stabilize and quest to win.
So you feel like the matchup is good for Amber and Amethyst? Do you think it's kind of even?
I would say it's pretty even, but Amber and Amethyst has a little bit of an edge because of that card draw. Simply having more cards than your opponent is always good.
Yeah, especially with starter decks where the power level's a little lower. Usually quantity is more important than quality.
And I think Amber and Amethyst has got both.
All right, so we are crowning both Amber and Amethyst and you as the undisputed champion of the Lorcana Academy tutorial program.
And now I'm your favorite Disney princess.
Truthfully, you always have been. Okay, Veggie, I have a question for you.
What's your question?
So we finally crowned a winner. If I want to go pick up this Amber and Amethyst deck to play in person, do you know where I can go?
In fact, you can head to Coolstuffinc.com to pick up any of the starter decks or all 3, and make sure that you use our code ACADEMY at checkout to get 5% off of your order. Also, check out the gameplay videos of each of these matchups in the links in the description.
So I think that's a good place to leave it. From everyone here at the Lorcana Academy, stay in school.